And so, my friends, it is now time for the Airthings Masters final. It's Levon Aranyan and Timur Rajabov, but there is actually an inclusion, different from the last tournament. Now we have a match for 3rd and 4th place, being played between Maxim Vachier-Lagrave and Daniel Dubov. I will take it on a round-by-round basis. This might be my shortest intro ever. We got the scoreboard. I will show you some fun memes and a funny clip. Let's begin with our first final match. It's d4 from Timur. We have knight f6, e6. The two knights, queen's gambit, and bishop to b4. We have seen this many times. If you haven't seen this many times, this is the queen's gambit declined by black, and it's bishop to b4, which is the Rogozin variation. Now we have bishop to g5, which is one of the most popular moves, and from this point, for the next 20 moves, both players played instantly. Black takes the pawn in the center. This allows white to put 2 pawns in the center. Black attacks the center with the other c-pawn. We have bishop taking on c4, pawn capturing on d4, chopping back on d4, take, the queen comes out to a5. The queen hits the bishop and the pawn over here. So we have bishop b5 check, which attacks the knight and covers the queen from hitting c3. Black moves knight to d7, we take. Now black plays queen takes c3 check, an in-between move, a Zwischenzug, and you don't have to take this back because this is a check. King to f1, g takes f6, the move h4, trying to play rook h3 and bring the rook like this. By the way, you say, Levy, why are you going so fast? This is theory. Apparently, this position has been played hundreds of times by grandmasters already, and I'm just going to kind of get you up to speed. a6 attacking the bishop, bishop comes back. The most important moment as far as I'm concerned in this game is around here, right? So Timur plays this move queen b3, which looks like it loses the knight. You're not actually losing the knight, because then there's rook d1, and I pin your rook to your queen to your rook, and you lose your rook. So until literally this move, okay, this is the 24th move of the game, the players were following another game, played in correspondence chess, which is not live chess. It's chess where you send in a move after a period of thought. Generally, that just turns into, like, computer analysis. But basically, the evaluation of this position is that Levon is up a pawn. He has 6 pawns and white has 5, but he's very undeveloped, and his king is stuck in the middle. So the way Levon kind of dealt with this pressure, because Timur was picking at him, is Levon sacrificed his b7 pawn, and a few moves later, I don't know if he sacrificed it or not, but he sacrificed the a6 pawn. And I'm saying he might have just missed that you could lose it in the sequence of things, but essentially he now is down the pawn. He's down the pawn, he's not up the pawn anymore, he's down the pawn, but his king is going to get to safety, and he is going to activate his pieces. So both players giving the deficit of a pawn back and forth to each other. If you look at where the pawn is, this is white's extra pawn, right? You have to identify where it is. It's an outside pass pawn. If you could put the rook behind it and then push it, maybe you will use it correctly, but Levon plays e5. Now the bishop hits this pawn, and the king can mobilize along the dark squares. You'll notice that all of white's pawns are on light squares, literally every single one, which is not good if you have a light squared bishop yourself. Bishop is kind of killed mobility-wise, and Levon just got really active. Both rooks in the territory. Timur never had a chance to actually activate his a2 pawn, and some short while later, there was a big simplification. It was taken, rook to c7, draw offered, and draw agreed. Why draw agreed? Because you're never getting through here. Like, it's 4-on-4. So the first one, a big theoretical fight, but one that ultimately resulted in a peaceful resolution between the players. The first game between MVL and Daniil. MVL's got the white pieces, and okay, we get, in Italian, normal stuff. Knight f6. Clearly, MVL has not watched my video on the fried liver, because here he would have played it. That's a joke. And we get just, normal stuff. A4 is a common move in these positions because it stops black from advancing the pawns on the queen side. Black castles, white castles, h6. Also very common move to prevent anything from coming to g5. h3 and bishop e6. And again, if you play this position with the black pieces, here's your little mini lesson. White decides to take. So how does this change the position? Well, black has doubled e-pawns, which could be a little bit bad. This pawn has no guard, but that pawn is unattackable. I just invented a word, because we can't go here, so it doesn't really matter. And in the long run, black has an open file. Watch how Dubov tries to improve his position over the next few moves. MVL brings the knight back. Dubov plays a5, just by hanging on, and queen e8. Now the queen has some vision, which normally it wouldn't if the pawn was on that square. So the queen slides in, and the king slides over. Another common move. Why would you slide your king over if it means you have to start, like, how does this start an attack? Because you can play g5, and you don't need to worry about your king on the g file anymore. MVL slides the knight back. He potentially could be activating a pawn move, so Dubov, the second MVL retreats in this game, smacks him in the middle with d5. It's not like a winning move or anything, but it's giving him something to think about. So MVL plays a quiet, improving move. Dubov brings the only piece not involved in the game. Rook d1 and queen g6. Just improving his position on the king side, lurking, pressuring potentially. And now, knight d7. Knight d7 is rerouting the knight to the other side of the board. The bishop can come in here, and the rook is open. So it's a move that goes backwards, but has three different ideas. King h2 from MVL, just defending his knight. And rook f7. He's making his intentions very clear. He is doubling up the rooks. Another concept, doubling up the rooks, staring down at this knight. You are not necessarily going to take this knight because it is protected, but you have pressure. And then Dubov closes the center. Very instructive. Why is this instructive? Because if you want to attack your opponent's king, you need to lock the center shut. Instructive moment, he does exactly that, brings the knight. Again, MVL is doing a lot of nothing, right? Like, if you go back like 8 moves, for example, like to here, how has MVL's position changed in 10 moves? Look at the difference between the two after knight c5. Black has advanced the army, and now queen slides back. Uh-oh. Rook takes f3, kaboom. Whoa, 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 whoa. Sacrificing the exchange, sliding the queen back, f2 is coming. Rook g2, bishop is coming. I said all of this was going to happen, right? King g1, b6. In the middle of all of this craziness, Daniil just solidifies. Queen goes to e2. Knight takes on a4. And look at this trick by MVL. And knight f5, disconnecting the queen from the defense of the rook. So Dubov has to give back the rook and then take. And so what happens here? We have a position where it's knight and 3 pawns for the rook. And the entire queen side is open. So how does Dubov win this game? He brings the knight back and rotates it at b4, pressuring this. He brings the other knight to d4. And we get this. Queen e4, blocking up my pawns. Knight c2, and that's it. Watch as he finishes things off. Bap. 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 And now the final move. The bishop has moved to defend. Queen to g5. Calm move, and MVL resigns the second he is offered a queen trade because this endgame is simply losing. You have knight to e2 check as a fork possibility. The pawn is coming, the pawn is coming. It's over. MVL chooses not to play on, and Daniil Dubov strikes first in their match to take a 1-0 lead. And here is where I have my meme for you, ladies and gentlemen, as we move to the second round, this one between Levon and Timur. This is a very funny, this was from my Discord community, you should join it, link is in the description. Someone put this together, very, very funny Spider-Man meme. It's Dubov trying to channel his inner Mikhail Tal. If you don't know who Mikhail Tal is, he was one of the most aggressive and creative players in the 20th century in the Soviet Union, always was sacrificing pieces, and frankly sacrificing his health as well. He was not a very healthy man, so... The second game between Levon and Timur was a Rossolimo Sicilian, which got very weird early. Here, Levon should develop a knight or develop a bishop or do something, and he, of course, after castling, plays h... what? And then h... what? And then... This is apparently something that is in the Super GM contract, like you just have to move your H-pawn like a, I don't know, I mean, and just, I don't know. The point is that it takes away the knight's natural move G6, and then he can advance on this side of the board. Actually, he does get a very interesting position, but Timur this whole event has been very good at responding to such things, and plays G5, like allowing en passant, because then knight G6, and now he just gets his bishop to G7. A short while later, his bishop was traded, but he has no problems. Just king H7, his position is okay. Knight D2, and now Timur says, who's attacking who, big man? F5. Uh-oh. F4, look at this. Clamping down here with the pawns taking space away, right? E5, D5, queen C5. So Timur sacrifices a pawn. And queen b6, this is not hanging a knight because the queen is pinned. So he sacks a pawn and wants a queen trade because in this position, he is just better. His rook is hitting a2, and his knight can jump in and destroy everything, whereas white's knights are very passive. White's e-pawn is blocking any of his own pieces' access. Knight b3, we get king g7, and a short while later, the queens were traded, and a pawn was picked up. Now Levon is up 2 pawns, and yet his position after rook c8 is still suspicious. Timur playing amazing chess here. d4, activating his bishop, pressuring this knight. It's got no moves. The knight's just stranded. It can't be attacked, but it's off, just wandering on the highway. Right? Knight f1, rook c5. Pressuring this, and rook b5 is coming potentially to hit the knight and add something to the queenside pressure. This is coming. Knight d2, and now this knight sees an opportunity to pounce in. Knight e3. This position is looking worse and worse now for Levon. Rook f3, knight f3, rook d8, a3, knight g4, attacking the rook. And, well, disaster strikes. 2 super GMs spotted a repetition of moves, so they both went for it. I guess Timur here felt like his pressure, it was enough pressure, and he basically was not going to win this game, down 2 pawns. And Levon said, well, I'm down 2 pawns, but my position is horrible. Not the world's most boring draw, but a draw all the same. Which means we need to move to the second game between Daniel Dubov and Maxim Vachier-Lagrave. This time, MVL with the black pieces goes for, well, first it's a Moscow variation, very fitting for Dubov, and then he trades and plays c3. The point of this move is to advance in the center with the move d4. So we get knight f6 attacking the pawn, rook e1, all of this happens. And a weird one from MVL, d5, a move that doesn't, it's not a bad move, it's a fair trade, but he's opening the position while his king is still in the middle. So knight c3, take, and bishop d6. Now a fantastic lesson here from Daniel Dubov. Your opponent is a move away from getting castled, a move away from getting their king safe. So what do? You don't just play a random move like h3, you gotta play knight g5. Let them know you're coming. Because if now castles, white just goes queen d3, for example, or queen h5. This forces black to respond to a threat of mate, knight to e4, bishop to h6, and you punish your opponent for castling, even though it's their most natural move. MVL didn't like what was going to happen after knight g5, so he played queen to e7, but now rook b1. I'm continuously creating threats on you, right? So now you play b5, now queen to h5, good luck ever castling, it's mate. So rook c8, bishop defends, g6, queen h6. Now I'm literally preventing you from castling. If you play queen to f8 in this position, of course, do not trade the queens. Oh my god, please don't trade the queens. Don't trade the queens. Keep attacking your opponent while their king is in the middle. In the game, MVL played bishop to c6. What is the idea of this move? The idea of this move is that black wants to land the bishop on d5. From d5, it's brilliant. It defends e6 forever, and it doesn't allow white to mobilize on this diagonal. So, how can Dubov create a move here which creates an initiative? Not create a move, play a move that creates an initiative. He's played every accurate move, now what? And he plays a great move. He plays the move a4. Why? Because if you take, now I play c4, you never get to d5, and I crash through the middle of the board, because my rook and your queen and king are lined up. If you don't take, which is what happened in the game, MVL actually hit his king on d7, if you don't take, I have now traded on b5 and I've destabilized this pawn, so I don't let your bishop go here anyway, because it needs to serve the role of defending that pawn. Fantastic move. Dubov looked around for where he could get in, he found it, now he plays this, and the pawn on b5 is just falling. I mean, MVL had to allow this or else the knight was going to get too powerful. The rest of the game, Dubov is a pawn up, and he just tries to consolidate. He creates a getaway square for his king, so he no longer has back rank problems. A little while later, there was a trade of rooks. And now, the way you win this with white is you use your majority. And you try to push it through, and this king is kind of weak. So we get queen a1, queen a3, queen is kind of picking and prodding, queen check, and queen slides it. So MVL loses a pawn for a pawn, but it's not really a pawn for a pawn. Again, look around. Where is the extra pawn? Remember that Rajabov game from the very first game where he had the extra pawn but it couldn't move? You remember that? Well, in this game, he does have an extra pawn. It's right here. And that pawn sure as hell can move. And it will. d5. And that's all you really needed. On this move, move 44, move 43 for black, MVL resigned because he cannot prevent a slew of threats. He can't prevent queen c6, d6, pushing through, and most importantly, Dubov's king is completely safe. So MVL resigns, Daniel Dubov takes a death grip on this match. He is now up 2-0. So, we move to the third game between Timur Rajabov and Levon Aranyan. And I'm not gonna lie to you, my friends, this game is gonna look like deja vu. This is deja vu. I'm sorry, but this is literally the first game. The entire first game. I mean, I would love to go move by move, but this is the entire first game repeated, except one small difference. Here, Levon and Timur mix it up. He allows him to take on b7 first, and he castles, and then knight g6, g3. Now the rooks get traded. A little bit later, the second pair of rooks got traded, and we got a position that looked kind of like this. And actually, I'm not sure if exactly in this moment, or like right here, for example, I have a clip for you. This was Timur basically channeling up his chakra to try to win this game, okay? So here's a clip for you. It's muted. But Timur at this point begins to give you the secrets of being a 2800 level grandmaster, 2700 level grandmaster. The secret is you have to poke your eyeballs out. While the live commentary is going on, he slowly begins to stick his fingers into his eyeballs going, oh my god, this is so boring. I should have just gotten eliminated in the semifinal. On a serious note, if he's actually not feeling well and he's tired, obviously, I wish Timur no headaches and all happiness and the best. But this game, my friends, was a snoozer. Taking a nap would have been more interesting than following this game. It had a little bit of mild excitement, but it just went down to a queen endgame. The players shuffled, and sadly, Timur's meditation did not help. 1.5. Levon, this match, well, I mean, Levon's just playing normal stuff with black. He's just playing, he has no problems drawing with the black pieces. That's kind of the meta. So we move to the third round game as Daniel Dubov has a 2-0 lead over MVL, and he's got the black pieces. So what will happen? MVL's got to win this game. He's got to score 2 points today to even the match. So we get e4, e5, and much more of the same as we had in the first round, until this move 9 here after rook e1. Daniel Dubov plays knight takes e4. He takes the pawn in the middle, which is covered by 3 pieces. But here's the point. If you take back with the pawn, I take your bishop. If you take my bishop first, I take your knight, and I attack your queen. Then I will take your bishop back. And if you take like this, I fork you in the middle. So there's a big skirmish now. Bishop to b5, d4, bishop c6, b6, knight e5, ed3, knight c6, dc2, queen c2, queen d7. So what's going on? It's completely even material, but MVL's got this nice knight on c6. Bishop goes to f4, bishop slides to f6. Very powerful bishops here for Dubov. But it's MVL here who's putting some pressure. Why? Because of the split pawns. The split pawns and the activity of the knight on c6. And he's got kind of targets there, right? He's got shooters here on bishop f, bishop coming down to c7. And so what happens? He plays the move b5. Dubov takes on c6, rook c6, queen f5, bishop c7, and Dubov probably assumed here that after a b5, we're gonna get a b5, queen b5, a very peaceful resolution. We all go home. I take a 1-0 lead. But MVL plays a5. And even though material is equal, he has what's called a protected passed pawn. He's got an outside passer, and he's creating a chance for himself. Dubov plays rook e6 and snatches off the rooks. Bishop defends. It's a nice square. They all defend each other. Queen goes to b3, defending the pawn and pressuring this. And after queen d3 offering the trade, Dubov plays b4, and his logic was, I just play bishop c3. His bishop defends his pawn. My bishop defends my pawn. Done. Draw. And Daniel Dubov couldn't have been further from the truth. But before I actually put this on the board, this is winning for MVL. I'm going to spoil this right now. But how? How on earth is he going to win? If the bishop goes here and defends, the rook needs to monitor the movement of this pawn. Otherwise, the pawn will go to b2 and will be insanely annoying. This rook can't really move, but neither can the bishop and the pawn. So in the endgame, who is extremely important? Who is overlooked? The king. Watch this. King f1, king e2, king d1, king c2, king b3, f5. Now here you can continue moving the king, and by the way, the reason Dubov's not moving the rook is because a6, a7. Like, the rook cannot allow this pawn to get to a7, because then it's horrible, because now the rook, it has to stay on the back rank. At least now the pawn is a few squares away. So what happens is they basically lock up the pawns here. Notice MVL does not take. It's a fair trade, but it's not a fair trade because he needs to go g3 to prevent the king from getting closer. In endgames, pawns are like fences. They're like thorns. You can't get close because you're going to get pricked. If you take, you just allow the king entrance. Right now, this king is being denied entrance, right? So g4, h4, and now h5, locking down that whole side of the board. What was that original plan? Oh yeah, oh yeah. Let me keep bringing that king. Let me push my pawn, a7, and ending the game in style. Rook takes b6 check, king a5. Who's gonna guard the pawn? Well, you could do this, but this is winning. Why is it winning? Well, the bishop stands on f2, monitoring the pawn. It doesn't let the rook move. But what do? You bring the king. You activate the king. As always, the king is the hero. Now, if the bishop continues, you have check. So the king's got to give way somehow, right? King f6, king d5, bishop e1, and rook a3. And now what you're going to do is you're going to give a check, king g7, and king to e5. At the right moment, you've brought your king close. You don't care about losing the pawn because you will win this pawn. And when you win this pawn, rook and 2 pawns versus bishop and 1 is winning. It would take you a little bit of time, but it would be a combination of moving your pawn, your king, and your rook, promoting or winning off Black's remaining pawn and having 2 passed pawns. So MVL, in astounding fashion, strikes back, which means that we will have a 4th game, but we will have also a 4th game in the matchup Levon Aranyan, Timur Rajapov. Will there be a draw, a peaceful resolution for day 1, or will somebody win? And we begin with a Berlin, which means that it's a draw, which means that I can just go to the game between Dubov and MVL. No, just kidding. Timur plays the Berlin. I mean, he's got black in the last round. Why wouldn't he? h3, bishop d7, rook d1, king c8. And okay, more of the same, g4. But this, as Hikaru described to me during the broadcast, putting the king here rather than back into the middle defending f7 allows white to play g4, knight g5, and f4. And white is expanding on the king side, taking a lot of central pawn space, and potentially f7 could be a weakness. I mean, look how passive black is. But it's the Berlin, so everything is a draw. Now, Timur starts taking space on the other side of the board, plays the move c5. Then he plays b6. This is the common Berlin structure. You can play a5, a4, you can bring the knight. So we get f5, knight c6, and bishop to f4. Knight d4 attacks this pawn, and a couple of squares on this side. And Levon says, okay, I don't care. Take my c2 pawn, so what? I'm gonna attack your knight. I'm gonna attack your knight. Get out of here. I'm gonna move my knight into the middle of the board. So this is the 21st move of the game, and I don't know if you've realized or been counting, but this knight for Timur has moved half of his moves. It is the 21st move of the game for black, which means black has made 20 moves. 10 of them have been with that knight. Now 11 of them have been with that knight, trying to trade this knight. We get knight to e3, knight back to c6, basically offering Levon a repetition here, by the way. And Levon thinks for a while and says, look, man, you're not going to clown me like this. You've moved your knight 12 out of 22 times. I'm going to play f6. The point of f6 is that if you trade, I've opened up the bishop. I'm going to bring my knight back to d5. You've got a weak pawn on h6 in all the endgames, and you can't really easily develop this bishop. And he's not wrong, but f6 has one very serious drawback to it. What is it? What would you describe the drawback of the move f6? The color complex. You've put 2 pawns on dark squares, which means the squares in between the pawns are very weak. So Timur begins bishop d7, and he begins untangling. He plays the move g5, attacking the bishop. There is no en passant here, because you need your pawn to be on f5. You need to be side by side. Then he plays bishop to e6, taking control of the light squares. Then he moves his king out to b7. Then he brings the rook down to the middle. One pawn move for Levon. One pawn move was all Timur needed to untangle the net. And the reason in this position you can't just take this b pawn is because of the stockpile of pressure, but this is protected. Now watch. He plays a5. He forces the pawn forward to trade it off and then mobilize to b4. Timur played this game without moving 2 of his pieces. It is the 33rd move of this game, and he has not moved his bishop on f8 or his rook on h8. Trade, but because in all Berlin endgames you've got a majority of pawns on the queen side, that's all he needed. Knight d5, c4. Uh-oh. 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 The only move of the game that the bishop made was to take a knight. It took 36 moves, but he did it. And now, rook d8. It took 37 moves, but the rook has been moved. Crazy. And that's it. He mobilizes, bishop d7, rook e8 to the main line, knight c5, knight e4. And a few trades later, all the pawns for Levon fell. Levon at this point is down 2 pawns, and after rook d3, he resigned, because he's not going to guard this. And if he gets into an endgame like this, he will be 3 pawns down. Yes, you can go knight to f5, and yes, you can take the h6 pawn, but it doesn't matter. You will not win this with the 2 extra pawns here. I will push them, and I will win the game. Crazy. Timur Rajabov wins with the black pieces in the final round of the first day, and he strikes first versus Levon Aronian to take a 1-0 lead. Which brings us to the final game of the day between Daniil Dubov and Maxim Vachilegrov. Daniil's got the white pieces. He's up 2-1. Maxim has to win with black to even this match. Let's see what happens. Another Sicilian. And very similar to the last one, this time MVL does not even develop the rest of his pieces. In the other game, he played e6 and bishop e7 and d5. But in this game, he just takes a pawn. Why is he playing so risky? Well, he's playing so risky like this because he's got to win the game. Dubov will do nothing, right? He will just do nothing. So MVL takes a risk. Dubov closes at d5, doesn't let him develop with e6. So MVL says, all right, let's go long. Well, opposite side castling, what do you do when you castle on opposite sides? b4, of course. You got to play b4, e6, and now knight c4. Dubov is going for knight b6. If you play knight takes d5, I mean, there's a rook hanging, and I also have some ideas like a sacrifice on d5 and then knight to b6. Not at this very moment, but for example, had this been a rook on d1, taking on d5 and playing knight b6 forking would have been very nice. But in the game, Maxime plays queen to b5. Okay, plays queen to b5, attacking the knight. We get knight fd2. What a move from Dubov. What a move. Gluing the knight together, and now it's like, yo, man, what the hell is this queen doing here? I'm not worried about losing a pawn. Look at this. a4 and b5. Danger levels. My knight is hanging, but I'm using my attacks here. I am now down 3 pawns. You want to know what the engine evaluation of this position is? The engine evaluation of this position is +9. Down 3 pawns, but +9. Why? Because if you just go take, attacking the rook, take, and sliding the knight back, black cannot prevent the attack. The threat here is a combination of a few things. Number 1, it's to play knight takes d5. After that, it's to go rook down to a8. After that, it's to play knight c4 with the knight on d5. There's also a queen g4 check lurking. There's queen f3 as well and rook b1 in the future. Not at the moment, because you will lose the rook. But just in general, the queen side, c4, knight d5, all these things. Daniil Dubov plays the move queen to f3, though, first. And after d takes c4, not moving his knight out of danger, bishop f6, MVL here had a stunning move. He could have avoided taking back. He could have played rook d7. That's the difference between the two, is that he already got a knight. He doesn't have to take. This looks like you're getting mated, but you're not. Your king's actually amazingly safe somehow, and you are up 3 pawns. But MVL did take back on f6, and went for a position where he loses the pawn on f6 and the rook. But he goes here. What is the count of material here? It is a rook for a bishop and 2 pawns. Black has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6 pawns, so black is up 2 pawns. But, what is going on? This is crazy. This is crazy, absolutely crazy. Wait a minute. Who's even winning here? You know what I'm thinking about when I see so many pawns? 4 pawns versus 1? I think, what happens when all the pawns get rolling? Now here, Dubov plays the move knight f1. It's a good move. Trying to route the knight back to the middle. Queen b6 from MVL. Queen a8, queen a6. He wants the queen trade, because he wants the endgame with all the pawns. If you trade the queen, the king's no longer in danger. So queen goes all the way back. Boom, b5. Uh-oh. Knight e3. Knight e3 is coming, which means that knight d5 is coming. And if, for example, if you just play b4 here and you let me go knight d5, you lose. You just cannot stop the attack. The bishop slides back, but there's check. King c7, sorry, almost hung the king. King c8, I mean, you just take, and worst comes to worst, I just pick this pawn up. I can probably hunt your king down with knight e7 as well. So MVL here plays the only computer move that doesn't lose the game. He plays queen c8, which by itself doesn't look hard, because it's just a queen trade. But there is a move here, knight takes c4. The point of which is, if you take, I take your bishop, and I cut off your king cannot come off the 8th rank anymore, the pawn will come down, but it will walk right into my king, you're gonna lose this game. MVL sees all that, and in this position, plays king d8. A cold-blooded move. The point being, you defend your bishop, and you don't damage your structure of pawns. And now, it's like, call an ambulance. But not for me. Dubov plays knight a3. This attacks the pawn here, forcing it to move forward. The logic being that you split the pawns. Pawns together are better than pawns apart, right? So, knight c4, king d7. f3, b3. King comes, bishop f6. The difference between this and the last endgame is the king is never going to be fast enough. The bishops laser beam the board. This endgame shows you the power of knight versus bishop on an open board. This is why bishops are considered a little bit better than knights. Because look, knight d2, b2, knight e4, take, and now an absolutely beautiful maneuver. Bishop g5, rook b1, and bishop c1. Such an important maneuver to know when you play bishop and pass pawn endgames versus rooks. The rook is now in jail, and you know what they say about prisoners in Russia? They make them watch Anish Giri videos. Don't go to jail in Russia. And if you don't understand the reference, watch the Sagar Shah stand-up special. King to e2, king to e6, king to d3, king to e5, g3, pawns are coming, pawns are coming, pawns are coming, h4, f5, pawn takes a5, king takes a5, king to d4, king to g4, king d5, and king g3, king d6, and king h4, and king e5, and king g3. The h-pawn will promote to h1, and it's over! MVL wins! What? What? This is why you watched till the end. Aren't you glad you did? 2-2. Nothing to choose between MVL and Daniel Dubov in the matchup for 3rd and 4th place. 3rd place, $25,000. 4th place, just $15,000. A $10,000 split. Oh my goodness, what a comeback. Oh my goodness, what a recap. I will see you tomorrow for the final day of the Airthings Masters. Leave a comment. Give the video a like, huh?